So I'm Aaron Swartz. I'm supposed to talk today about Wikipedia and the future of libraries. And since this is TOC, I figured we'd start with a quick table of contents of what I'm going to talk about. Basically, I want to ask 5 questions about Wikipedia. I want to tell you about the amazing success story, the amazing rate of growth, the amazing popularity, and the amazing accuracy of Wikipedia. I want to look at the history behind it. How did it get here? How did it start from someone's crazy idea and become one of the most popular sites on the internet? I want to look at who are the people writing all of this content on Wikipedia, and I'm going to tell you about some research that I've done that challenges the conventional notion of how Wikipedia gets written. And I want to answer why. What is it about Wikipedia that's made it successful when so many copycat sites have failed? What are the features that make something into a really powerful and successful user-generated site? And finally, I want to tell you about a project that I'm working on that takes Wikipedia and applies it to books. And so it will be a little bit of self-promotion at the end. So the first question is what? This is the story of a website called Wikipedia, a website that's an amazing success, that has over 2.2 million articles and more every day, that's one of the top 10 most popular sites on the internet, and that a recent poll of Americans found 36% of adults, 46% of students, and 8% of Americans visit every day. Now, one question people have when you talk about Wikipedia is, doesn't it have a lot of errors? Aren't there a lot of mistakes in Wikipedia? And it's true. Wikipedia has mistakes. This is most famously a claim that John Seigenthaler was involved in the Kennedy assassination. But you have to compare Wikipedia against something else. You know, the New York Times also has mistakes. This famously is the New York Times claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. So the New York Times has errors too, and here's an amazing fact about the New York Times that few people know. The New York Times doesn't have any fact checkers, right? There's no system of correcting things in the New York Times other than some random person out in the audience writing them a letter, which is exactly the same system Wikipedia has. So if you want to measure Wikipedia's accuracy, you have to compare it against some baseline. And that's exactly what the folks at the prestigious journal Nature decided to do. They ran a little experiment where they took a bunch of science articles from Wikipedia and a bunch of science articles from the Encyclopedia Britannica and sent them to the scientific experts that write for Nature, took the names off and said, can you find any errors in these articles? And what they found was, in their words, the difference in accuracy was not particularly great. The average science entry in Wikipedia contained around 4 errors and Britannica around 3. So Wikipedia did a little worse off, but considering it was a small study and it only dealt with a handful of articles, about the same as Britannica. But there is one big difference. Britannica's response to this article was to threaten a lawsuit. Wikipedia's response was to set up a group of people on a manhunt to find every error that was found in this study and correct it. And they succeeded. So this is this amazing story. 2.2 million articles, one of the top 10 websites, 36% of Americans use it, as good as Britannica, but here's perhaps the most amazing bit of it all. If you look at the other top 10 websites, like Yahoo has 10,000 employees, Time Warner has 90,000, Disney has 130,000, Wikipedia has, until recently, 4. They did all of this with 4 people. And the real question is how? So to find out, let's go back in the time machine. Let's go back to 2000. And in 2000, there was a website that most of you probably haven't heard of, a website called Nupedia. Now, Nupedia's idea was simple. They were going to make a free online encyclopedia. But if you're starting a new encyclopedia and it's going to be on the internet, the first thing you're going to be worried about is credibility. Why is anyone going to take your online encyclopedia seriously if it's just written by a bunch of random schmoes on the internet? So they were paranoid about credibility. They wanted to do everything they could to make their encyclopedia be taken seriously. So what they did was they had this complicated process for getting your article into Nupedia. The first thing you had to do was you had to prove that you were an expert in the field just to be assigned an article. So you had to have a PhD usually to get an article. Then you had to find a lead reviewer, another person with a PhD. Then it had to be professionally reviewed, and it had to be reviewed by the community, and then it had to be professionally copy edited and copy edited by the community, and then it had to be converted to HTML and reviewed again and put on the website. And basically, in 2000, they started with 0 articles, and by 2001, using this amazing process, they had a whopping 12 articles. In fact, the site is still around. You can go visit if you want. It's 2008, and they now have 27 articles. So this man, the man who was in charge of Nupedia, Larry Sanger, realized that this wasn't working. And so what he did is he sent an email to the Nupedia community with an idea, saying, let's make a wiki. We'll have a site that people can use to sort of post things on, and it will be a great way of getting more content into Nupedia. You know, it's a little feature we can add on the side. Now here's what happened with Wikipedia. So they started this simple site. Larry Sanger sent a bunch of emails out. He sent them to various professional experts in the field, you know, maybe professors without tenure or geeks on the internet, people who were thinking of contributing to Nupedia or would be interested in that kind of project, and said, hey, post your stuff to Wikipedia. It'll be on there immediately. You get instant gratification. And so they got a couple of articles this way. And what happened is those articles then quickly appeared on Google. And when your article appears on Google very quickly, no matter how obscure it is, it ends up getting to users. Right? And so the users saw these articles, and they saw, oh, here's an interesting article posted by an expert. And even if they're only 12, they went back to Wikipedia, and they wrote more. And they wrote more articles, which meant more articles in Google, which meant more articles in users, which meant more articles getting written. And you had this very powerful, virtuous cycle that caused Wikipedia to grow. Here's what happened. In 2000, it had around 0 articles. You know, 2002, it had about Nupedia's level, but it very quickly takes off. 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. And now we're at that 2.2 million articles. That's the kind of exponential growth everyone wants to see. And so the question is, who's writing all of these articles? Well, this is Jimmy Wales. He was the creator of Nupedia and kind of the spokesperson for Wikipedia. And he goes around the world giving lots of talks like this one. He was at this conference in the last edition. And he tells people how he thinks Wikipedia gets created. When I saw him at Stanford, this is what he said. He said, the idea that a lot of people have of Wikipedia is that it's some emergent phenomenon, the wisdom of mobs, swarm intelligence, that sort of thing. Thousands and thousands of individual users, each of whom is adding a little bit of content. Well, he says that's not true. In fact, he knows how Wikipedia is made, and Wikipedia was written by a dedicated group of 500 volunteers who all know each other. It's much like any traditional organization. So very quickly, these became the two sort of kind of consensus views about how Wikipedia might work. One we might call the millions of ants model, where each little ant contributes a sentence here or there. And the other we could call the Gang of 500, in which there are 500 friends of Jimmy Wales, and they wrote all of the encyclopedia. Now, Wales argued that he had figured out which one of these was true because he had done a study, or more accurately, he had a friend in the Gang of 500 do a study for him. And what he found was that 50% of all edits on Wikipedia were done by just 0.7% of the people. And in fact, 70% of the edits were done by 2% of the people. So it seemed like his Gang of 500 theory was proven true. You have a very small number of Wikipedia users creating a huge number of the edits. But at Stanford, when I heard him give this talk, someone in the audience said, what do you mean by edits? And Wales explained that by edit, he meant going onto Wikipedia, typing something in, and hitting the submit button. Every time someone hits the submit button, that counts as an edit. And so someone in the audience accurately said, well, why don't you count characters? Why don't you count every letter someone types into Wikipedia and see which of those last? And Wales said, oh, sure, I'll do that in the next revision, but I'm sure it will only strengthen my results because that means we won't count vandals and we won't count things that get reverted. Now think about that for a minute. Wales says that things written by people who aren't in the Gang of 500 are either vandalism or they're stuff that doesn't belong in the encyclopedia and ends up getting reverted, ends up getting deleted. This is how they think of people outside their clique. In fact, I went to a conference of Wikipedia developers where a professional expert in computer usability had done a careful study of how Wikipedia works and said they wanted to make it easier. They had watched a bunch of people try and edit and try and do various tasks of Wikipedia, and they had put together a formal report, and they'd come up with some suggestions on how to prove it and make it easier. And the developers listened very politely and then said, well, we don't really want to do that. We don't need any more vandals. They were convinced, and speaking to them one-on-one, they remain convinced that people who are not inside the Gang of 500 are mostly vandals. Now, I'm suspicious. Is it really true that the Gang of 500 was able to do all this? I mean, 500 people, let's say 1,000 people, okay? Let's say it's twice as big. They wrote 1 million articles in 5 years for no money? I mean, really? So I decided to investigate myself. And what I did was I first went and picked an article at random. So I picked this article. This is the article on the actor Alan Alda. And what I did is every page on Wikipedia has a full revision history where you can see every change that was ever made to it. So I went to the Alan Alda article, And I said, okay, well, let's start at the very first revision. So here's the very first revision of the article. It's 2 sentences. It says, Alan Alda is a male actor, famous for his role of Hawkeye Pierce in the television series MASH. On recent work, he plays a sensitive male character in drama movies. So that was there in April 2001, and stayed there until February 2002 when someone deleted the second sentence. And then it picked up. Someone added a sentence saying he was in the Scientific American TV show. Someone added a couple paragraphs. Some more paragraphs, someone adds a film list, someone adds his birthday, someone deletes a couple films from the list, adds a couple films, adds a comma, deletes a comma. Very exciting stuff. In fact, if you're thrilled by this, there's a great movie by John Udell, it's called Heavy Metal Umlaut, the movie, where he goes and looks at the Heavy Metal Umlaut page, the page about the umlaut over words in bands like Motorhead or Spinal Tap, and watches how it evolves. And it's actually kind of interesting seeing the various patterns and seeing how these articles grow and shrink. And if you're really obsessive, you can pick any article on Wikipedia and do it yourself. So anyway, I picked the Alan Alda page, and I wasted a day watching these changes. And what I began to notice was that often you'd see things like whole paragraphs being added. Right? So we saw that just a moment ago. You see a whole paragraph added, and suddenly the page grows. And so I'd look, who added this paragraph? Who wrote it? And invariably, I'd get a page like this. Some user who didn't even bother to create an account and had made 5 changes to the site altogether and then never came back again. And then sometimes I would see things like this. I would see someone add a comma or delete a comma or add a category at the bottom. So this is an example of someone tagging the page as a page about a US actor. Right? And when I click on these pages, I would see a page like this. I don't know if you can read that in the back, but he says, I'm a Wikipediaholic in denial. You can tell he's a Wikipediaholic because that's a link, and it goes to a quiz. Are you a Wikipediaholic? I noticed this pattern repeatedly. I noticed that big changes were made by small users, and these small changes were made by big users. And so I began to develop a theory. What occurred to me was maybe the gang of 500 is doing a lot of work, but they're all adding commas and categories. And the millions of ants are going there with a small number of changes adding actual content. And if you think about this, this makes a kind of sense. If you look at old things like the Encyclopedia Britannica, they have a model where basically there are a bunch of famous writers, like, in this example they've got Milton Friedman and Sigmund Freud and Jimmy Carter, and then they have a staff of 19 professional editors who take all this sludge sent in by these famous people and clean it up and make it into a decent encyclopedia, and then publish it as a bunch of big books. So it's not surprising that Wikipedia could work the same way. Of course, the authors are going to be rather different, but, it's not unreasonable to believe that there's this gang of 500 molding and shaping it into a coherent body of work. So I conducted my own study. I went and looked at the revision history of pages, but not just of the Alan Alda page. I went and counted characters instead of edits like Jimmy Wales did. But I didn't just look at the Alan Alda page, I looked at hundreds of pages. And in fact, to look at hundreds of pages and thousands of pages, I had to get some time on a compute cluster. But I did that, and what I found was, let's just take the Alan Alda page as an example. If you count the way Jimmy Wales does, you get his results. So 7 out of the top 10 people who had the most edits on the Alan Alda page were registered users. 8 out of the top 10 had thousands of edits. In fact, if you look at this, number 4 had 7,000 edits, and number 7 had 25,000 edits. But if you count by characters, you get very different results. 8 out of the top 10 contributors didn't even bother to register. And in fact, 6 out of the top 10 had less than 25 edits on the whole site. The most amazing was number 9. The number 9 biggest contributor of content made 1 edit to the entire site, this edit. He just added 1 huge chunk to the Alan Alda page and then disappeared. And what I noticed was this pattern came up repeatedly. It came up at every article I looked at. And there were 3 exceptions. So I decided to investigate them carefully to see where the theory broke down. The first was on an article about the very technical topic of alkane. Alkane is a very technical subject, and I had a friend who said, okay, sure, maybe your thing is true for Alan Alda, because everybody knows about Alan Alda, but for kind of extreme science subjects, there are only a handful of people who could possibly write articles about them, and probably they're all written by 1 or 2 people. And sure enough, this article seemed to prove him right. It was all written by this guy named Psychim62. But I went and dug into it, and what I found was Psychim62 didn't actually write the whole article at all. In fact, he had just translated it from the German Wikipedia. So, okay, translating it's a lot of work, but, he didn't sit down and write a whole article. It's a lot less work. The second example I found that, didn't seem to agree was characters in Atlas Shrugged. It's a geeky topic. I suppose it's possible one person could have written a whole bunch of stuff about characters in Atlas Shrugged. And in fact, it appeared it was all written by this user named Catherine Monroe. But I went and dug into the history, and I found that she didn't write it at all. In fact, she had copied and pasted it from individual pages for each of the characters and combined them all into one page about all the characters in Atlas Shrugged, which doesn't seem anywhere near as impressive. The final thing that didn't seem to fit my theory was the page about Anchorage, Alaska. Anchorage, Alaska, it was made up of lots of small edits, but they were all by the same person. They were all by this user named Jeffrey Allen 1975. And it seemed like he was doing a lot of work. In fact, when I visited his user page, he said he had become burnt out. He'd become tired of Wikipedia and he left. But something smelled fishy about his whole writing style. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I went and started doing some searches, and very quickly I found that, once again, Jeffrey Allen 1975 hadn't written the page about Anchorage, Alaska. He had plagiarized it from dozens of websites, and nobody had noticed. So yeah, I found 3 exceptions, but it seems like they prove the rule. Every time you dig into a page that appears to be written by one person or a handful of people, or appears to be written by these big users, every time you dig into it, there's something else going on. In fact, this study has been replicated. A bunch of other people have looked at it in a bunch of other different ways, and they all come to basically the same conclusion. My favorite version of these is a guy looked at the power of editors over time. So editors are sort of the more higher-level people in the Wikipedia community. They get promoted from doing a lot of good work, and they get to become editors and oversee the changes other people make. And so he looked at their contributions over time, and he found out when they started, they made lots of contributions when they were just normal, everyday users. But by the time they had become editors, they contributed nothing to the site anymore. They spent all their time arguing. And he could actually prove it, right? He could count the number of substantive edits and the number of substantive arguments, and he found that they spent all their time arguing. Now, I don't mean to bash on editors, okay? Editors are important, right? I use editors. Everybody uses editors. Without editors, Wikipedia would look ugly and inconsistent and even worse than it already does. I don't want to get rid of them. But I think in a lot of situations, you have a trade-off. You have to say, which is more important, pleasing these 500 people who edit my site or pleasing the actual people who contribute it? Should we make the site easier to use because that will get actual content? Or should we make it harder to use because that will make the editors happier? In fact, Jimmy Wales even admits this is important. So at that same talk at Stanford, he said, "For me, this is really important because I spend a lot of my time listening to the 500, and if they're just a bunch of people talking, well, then maybe I can safely ignore them when setting policy and instead worry about the 1 million people writing a sentence each." Of course, he was joking. He didn't think there were 1 million people writing a sentence each. But I think more fundamentally, a lot of sites face this choice. Do you want to have a great-looking site with no content, or do you want to have a really comprehensive site that looks kind of hideous? And the fact is, I think we know the answer. We can look at what's popular. MySpace, completely hideous, disgusting website that no self-respecting designer would ever visit, and yet it's extremely popular because everybody else's friends are on it. So I think in this example, the American people have spoken. The bastards. So I published my results. I told people about them, and Jimmy Wales, he was very appreciative. He changed his talk and stopped repeating the incorrect things. But the Gang of 500 was less enthusiastic. Their reaction was more like this: "I don't believe you." They said I must have goofed up the study somehow, and my answers were incorrect, and they were sure to get their own friend to redo it and find I was wrong. And I think the reason that they're so hesitant to understand this alternate theory is that their entire worldview consists of speaking to other members of the Gang of 500. So they spend all their days sitting on Wikipedia and, chatting with people and looking at the edit logs, and all they see are the other really heavy editors who spend all day chatting on Wikipedia and looking at the edit logs, more members of the Gang of 500. Then they take some time off and they go to conferences where they meet other people in the Gang of 500 and they hang out and go to bars and they chat. And then when they're not doing that, they spend their time arguing on mailing lists with other members of the Gang of 500. And so their entire life is surrounded by these other people, and so they tend to think these other people are really important. And just having a bunch of facts, a bunch of science, isn't going to persuade them that everything they experience in their life is wrong. And that's how they get to this mode where they think people are vandals and reverts. So the only time they see these other people are when they're removing their content or undoing them. In fact, there's a group of people who spend a lot of time removing this content. There's a group called the Recent Changes Patrol. This is actually their logo. Big cop telling you, stop, don't go into Wikipedia. They have these things that are like Wikipedia screensavers. They're kind of fun to use, but they show you every change as it goes by, and you say yay or nay, right? And if you say nay, boom, it gets taken out of Wikipedia. And so there are these group of people sitting at their computers all day watching every edit as it comes by. And it's really useful. It keeps out a lot of spam, and it keeps out a lot of vandalism, and it's part of what makes Wikipedia so high quality. But it does tend to give you this very defensive mentality, the mentality of the cop saying stop, and makes you afraid of the random average user. So I've told you about writers and editors. I want to talk about one more part of Wikipedia, which is the administrators. There's kind of a Wikipedia hierarchy. People say, oh, Wikipedia is this very flat site, anyone can edit. But actually, there's quite an advanced hierarchy that they've developed, along with a whole system of policies and rules that this hierarchy has to follow. So it starts out with the average anonymous user, the person who doesn't even bother to create an account and make some edits. And then there's the new user, the person who just creates an account. And like the anonymous user, both of these guys are blocked from editing certain controversial pages. So neither of these people can write about John Kerry until they wait around for a few days and become an established user. And then those people can write about almost everything. Then there are special people called rollbackers who are given a special permission to go and remove people's content from Wikipedia to automatically roll it back. Then there are administrators who can do things like delete pages and move pages. And there are bots which can edit pages en masse. So you write a computer program to change a whole bunch of pages or millions of pages. In fact, there's one really prolific bot that's written a page about every city in the United States by repeating the census data about that city. There are a bunch of bureaucrats who have the power, guided by the rules, but have the power to create new administrators and new bureaucrats and so on. Then there are check users who have the power to look at the IP address of particular users. There are oversights. There are stewards. There are all sorts of people in this Wikipedia hierarchy. There are developers, the people who actually manage the site. And finally, there's the founder who can do anything on the site, and that would be him. Now, of course, it's not just editing Wikipedia. Another big thing that goes on is debating on Wikipedia. So first, there's a process of negotiation where people go back and forth and say, I want the article this way, and you want it that way. But if that doesn't work out, then there's a formal arbitration committee made up of both a series of pseudo-professional mediators and a chair, and they sit and try and help you talk it out and help you come to a resolution. And if you can't, if you really think 2 + 2 is 5 and you want to fight about it, then that goes to the formal arbitration committee, where there's a bunch of clerks and a bunch of arbitrators, and they make a formal decision about who is right and who is wrong and decide what actually should go on the Wikipedia page. And if you think all of them are stupid, then all of this can be overruled by this man. Now, conceivably, this man is supposed to be bound by the rules of the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the organization that legally owns the servers and owns Wikipedia and controls it and runs these incessant fundraising drives trying to get money to send Jimmy Wales to Africa and so on. They're run by a board of trustees. It used to be Jimmy Wales and some of his friends, but now it's a group elected by the Gang of 500, and Jimmy Wales isn't even the chair. He's chair emeritus. But in practice, it doesn't seem like these people ever actually make any decisions of their own. A lot of it still ends up being run by this man. So we move to another question. Why does Wikipedia work? You know, you've got a top 10 website. It's got 2 billion articles, 36% of Americans, as good as Britannica, 4 employees. A lot of people looked at these lists of things, and they got an idea in their head. I can make a lot of money off of this. So there are a lot of examples. They said, oh, let's use Wikipedia to write books. Or maybe we'll use Wikipedia to sequence the genome, or make a travel guide, or, find all the corrupt people in Congress. In fact, the LA Times had this idea, let's use a Wikitorial. We'll let the users write our own editorials for us. Well, a couple weeks after they launched that idea, the headline changed from a wiki for your thoughts to, where is the Wikitorial? Unfortunately, we had to remove this feature because a few readers were flooding the site with inappropriate material. So why do some of these work? Why does Wikipedia work so amazingly and these others all fail? I think there are basically 7 reasons. There are 7 features Wikipedia had that these other sites didn't. Wikipedia has a clear goal. Number 1, everybody knows what an encyclopedia looks like, and when they see a Wikipedia page, they can kind of measure it against that guideline. Instead of going around in circles, they can say, we need to make this look more like an encyclopedia article, have the kinds of things we expect from an encyclopedia article, have the kind of stuff that we want to be in there. We know which direction we're fighting in. 2, it's a worthy cause. If you look at the guidelines of the Wikimedia Foundation, it says every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. That's our goal. That's kind of a really lofty goal. Everybody wants to let every human being have access to the sum of human knowledge. It's easy to get people to rally behind this kind of non-profit charitable mission in a way that you can't get them to rally behind writing your travel guides for you. 3, there's an objective standard. Wikipedia is bound by this guideline called neutral point of view, which says that you can't write a Wikipedia article on George Bush that says George Bush is an idiot. Instead, you have to say, critics argue George Bush is an idiot. right? That's a standard everybody can agree on. Surely critics argue George Bush is an idiot. That's just a plain fact of life. Everybody knows that. This was one of the reasons Wikitorial was doomed to failure, because you can't do that in an editorial. There's no standard. An editorial is supposed to argue for a point of view. There's no way to decide which point of view is right. The fourth feature Wikipedia has is it's broken up into lots of small pieces. People don't interact with an entire encyclopedia. The entire encyclopedia is huge. It's too hard to get your head around. Instead, they interact with a particular article, and usually they don't even do that. They interact with an article section, right? So this is an article section. It's small. It can fit on your screen. You can hold it in your head at once. It's the kind of thing that's easy to work with. Contrast that with a site like Wikibooks, where they're trying to get people to write entire books in a wiki. You can't keep an entire book in your head. You're not going to get a random person off the internet to read your book and then decide what to add. It's just too big. The fifth major feature is that Wikipedia is made up of useful pieces. If you remember this virtuous circle that got Wikipedia started, it's because each piece of Wikipedia is useful by itself. So even if you imagine it's day one and Wikipedia only contains an article about East African tree frogs, that'll show up on Google and it'll be just as useful as every other article on Google about East African tree frogs. Right? And so a bunch of users who are obsessed with East African tree frogs will come to the site and they will write more and so on, and it'll still be a pretty useful site, even though there's nothing in it. That's not true of a lot of sites. So for example, there's a project Wiktionary to write a dictionary in the same way Wikipedia wrote an encyclopedia. Well, dictionaries aren't very useful if they only have a handful of words in them. You only go to a dictionary if you know it's very likely to have the word you want. That means it already has to be pretty big. So it's very hard to get a Wikipedia dictionary off the ground. The sixth feature Wikipedia has is that it's personally useful. A lot of people out there want to learn, and the best way to learn is to read a lot of stuff and then try your hand at writing it. And Wikipedia is a good opportunity to write for a real audience, instead of just writing some term paper that you turn into a teacher or something. So it's useful to people. It's also kind of enjoyable. Maybe I'm crazy, but there seem to be a lot of other crazy people out there who actually enjoy writing content for Wikipedia. Writing is kind of fun. So I think these are the 7 features that made Wikipedia successful. And a lot of people, because they see Wikipedia, they don't think about the features that made it successful. Instead, they think, how can I get in on the money? Well, finally, I'm going to get in on the money. So, warning, there's talking about my own project ahead, but I think it'll be interesting to you because it's about Wikipedia and it's about books. I love books. I'm the kind of guy who came to New York with a big stack of books I checked out from the library to go through. I read lots of books, and I wondered, what does it mean to take Wikipedia and apply it to books? What does that look like? And the idea me and some friends had was that it means basically 1 page per book. You have an article, just like an encyclopedia article, but about a book, collecting all the information that we know about that book. So me and some friends got together. We got some money from the Internet Archive. We got some money from the California State Library. We now have around 6 people working on this project. And we built this site called Open Library. And the idea behind this site, which you can visit at demo.openlibrary.org, and hopefully we'll go officially live in a few more weeks, is there's a page for every book. We've got the book cover, we've got all the metadata about the book, the ISBNs, the Library of Congress headings, the Dewey Decimal Collection, all that sort of thing, reviews, excerpts about the author, all on 1 page. Kind of like Amazon, kind of like one of those sites, but instead of just being for the books that came out most recently or that are in print, we go all the way back. We get all the catalogs from all the big libraries in the country and hopefully throughout the world, and we make a page for each of them. So all these books that are hidden away in libraries that most people can't find, we make an exciting page for each of them. And for the books that are in print and the books that are exciting, we make a page that anyone can edit. We make a page where you can go through, so this is an example of the author page where we generate bibliographies and so on. But we go through and we collect all this data and we combine it in a way that anybody can edit. So you can add your own subjects, you can add your own reviews, you can add links between books, you can add all the information you want, in addition to all the information we're collecting from people like book publishers, like libraries, like book reviewers. Everything we can find out about a book, we want to put it together on 1 page. And then we want to tell you how to get that book. If the information makes you like it, we want to tell you to the bookstores where you can buy it, the libraries where you can borrow it, and of course, if it's an out-of-copyright book, a place where you can download it. So for out-of-copyright books, we have a nice little flipbook interface. And in fact, we have a scanning project at the Internet Archive where we're going through and scanning a bunch of out-of-copyright books. And for publishers that are scanning their backlist, we'd love to link to your scans too, even if it'll cost people a little bit of money to buy it. We want to have reviews, not only reviews from users, but reviews from Amazon, reviews from other sites, reviews from major publishers. So we're talking to people like Harper's and the New York Review of Books, linking in their reviews from the site. We want to have subjects, so you can find books by either the BSAC code or by the LC code or by tags or all the different ways of finding books. And we want to, most importantly, have relationships between books. I think this is something most other people haven't really got caught onto, but we want to be able to say, this book is a sequel to that book, or this book is a rebuttal to that book, or a reply to that book, or a parody of that book, or a satire, or maybe it's a television adaptation, or maybe it's a novelization of this other thing. We want to expose all of these relationships between books and media in a way that really hasn't been done before. And finally, we want to make a little bit of money by having a scan-on-demand service. So if you come to an out-of-copyright book, you can pay us a small fee, and we'll go get it off the shelf of a library for you and bring it to one of our scanning centers and put the PDF online for everybody to read. So for the price of getting it from a used bookstore, you can instead contribute it to the internet at large. And then, of course, we have a print-on-demand machine, so we can print it back out for you. The goal is basically to create this huge web of books, this place where you find one book that's interesting and you click and you find other books by the same author on the same subject, or rebuttals or responses or different editions. And you can kind of float through this system of ideas that's codified through books. And at the end, you find a book that really interests you, and you can go and find it at a local bookstore or order it online. But to do this, we need your help. I know there are a lot of people in the book industry in the audience who could make this much more of a success. If you have information about book review data, if you have information about particular books, Onyx feeds, MARC records, anything that could contribute to this big database of information, we're a nonprofit. We want to get it all available and make your books more interesting and more exciting. We want to contribute to this to the world, and we're willing to link back to you and drive more traffic to your site. So anything you can do to help would be much appreciated. So that's my talk. Thanks. So the buzzer at the corner here says I got 4 minutes for questions, so if someone wants to shout something out, I'd be happy to answer any questions people have. Yeah?
When somebody contributes by paying for a scan, when you put up the PDF, is there a name there, like at the beginning saying, so-and-so caused this to be scanned, like you put a plaque on a wall at the symphony or something?
So the question was, if someone scans a book, apparently there are microphones if people want to line up to ask questions. The question was, if someone scans a book, will we put a plaque or a book thing on the front of the page to say someone contributed the money to scan this book? So yes, that's part of the plan. It's just like at a library where we open a book and see this book was purchased thanks to the contribution of so-and-so. We want the PDFs to have the same thing. Say this book was digitized thanks to the contribution of so-and-so. Any other questions?
Notable gap in Google book searches and practically no metadata. So you basically just compare it from.
Yeah, so the question was, the problem with Google book search is that they have no metadata. We're kind of repairing that problem. I think that's exactly right. Google's got great data, right? But there's no metadata about the books. There's no way to figure out books by the same author or leap between books. We want to do that, and of course, when you get to a book that Google has scanned, we'll link to Google so you can read the book online. But I think building this metadata and building it in a community way so that anyone can contribute is really important, and that's something Google is traditionally not very good at. Other questions? So the question is, how do we compare to a site like LibraryThing? So we've been working very closely with LibraryThing. They've been great partners. I think one of the things we'll do for LibraryThing is we'll provide a great API and a repository of data that they can call upon. So when they want to find out about an obscure book, we'll have a special identifier for it. We'll have all the data we've collected for it. And sites like LibraryThing can pull that in and say, okay, we don't have to be in the business of keeping track of all this data. We can help users catalog their own collections, but we don't have to be in the business of crawling a bunch of libraries to find out what a book is, and instead can focus on the social aspects that make a site like LibraryThing really powerful. So we hope to be able to help them that way.
Is this something you're also looking at exposing in library catalogs themselves?
So the question is, are we going to expose it through library catalogs themselves? Yeah, we'd love to work with libraries on it. Unfortunately, integrating with most of the OPACs is very difficult, and we're kind of short-staffed, and we don't have time to spend integrating with OPACs. But where someone else is willing to do the work, or where they use an open source OPAC, we'd love to integrate with them, or even be a data provider for them in the future. And of course, we want to link back to libraries wherever possible. Anybody else?
How would you like metadata from publishers?
The easiest way for us is to get an Onyx feed. So we've got an Onyx feed from a bunch of publishers right now, but we don't have a huge staff who can call every publisher on the phone and fill out their Onyx forms and so on. So if you guys could talk to me or email me or something, we'd love Onyx feeds ideally, but we're willing to take whatever we can get.
Could you share a little more about how you linking of books, where you talk about Wikipedia? Is that going to be an automated way, or is it judgmental?
So the question was, how do we get the data about the links between books? Is that automated? Is that judgmental? I think the biggest way we're going to get it is through users. So we want to ask users to annotate books by saying, this is a sequel to such and such, this is a rebuttal to such and such. Let them expose the relationships they know about, but that really haven't been codified in any particular database, that aren't really being collected by professional catalogers and libraries, that aren't in any of these publishers' databases, and have them put that on our site and make it available to other people. Yep. Anybody else? Just shout out if you. All right. Sounds like there's nobody else, and we're just on time to go. Oh, one more? The question was, where do we get the money? So we've got funding right now from the California State Library and the Internet Archive, but long term we hope to sustain it through affiliate revenue by linking to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other sites to buy a copy of the book. And hopefully that should be enough money to keep the servers going and stuff like that. Anybody else? Yep.
What did you say about your analysis? Do you push back, or do you kind of come around?
So Tim O'Reilly asks, what does Jimmy say about my analysis? Originally, he was kind of hesitant, but thanks to the intercession of Dana Boyd and some other people, he took the incorrect slides out of his talk and says, that he will trust my numbers until he sees some reason not to. So he's been very good. It's really the Gang of 500 who elects the board and kind of runs the Wikipedia infrastructure and so on that's been much more hesitant to listen to it and has said, well, I just don't believe that. So unfortunately, Jimmy is kind of at increasing disconnect from those people who actually run the day-to-day operations of Wikipedia because he's more taken up by things like Wikia and his other projects. And so the people actually running the show are not really caring about the average users who contribute most of the content to the site. And that's really depressing. So Wikia is his for-profit version where they use the same software and let people set up wikis for things like Star Trek and Star Wars and Babylon 5 and put ads on the side. Anybody else?
Would Wikipedia be overrun by vandals?
So the question is, if you got rid of the Gang of 500, would Wikipedia be run over by vandals? I think if you just killed off all 500 of them, like a new 500 would grow up, just take their place, right? Honestly, I think that's what would happen. And frankly, considering human nature, they'd probably end up being as closed-minded and, protective of Wikipedia as the first 500. So I don't recommend mass assassination. I think there are strategies, though, to kind of lessen their power, and maybe discourage them and get in a new gang of people who's a little more open, or encourage the current gang of people to be a little more open-minded and stress to them the importance. But it really requires people at the top who are willing to invest a lot of energy in turning the ship around, and there's nobody really like that at the moment.
The downloads, you have a set of rules or guidelines that you're using to protect copyright and intellectual property rights?
So the question is, how do we protect intellectual property rights with the downloads? Right now, we're only scanning books that are out of copyright pre-1921, so we don't, or pre-1923, so we don't have to worry about that. Long term, we're going to link to publisher sites where hopefully they will take care of their own copyrights and do things like that so that we're not directly infringing copyright, that other people distribute the books.
Does the Gang of 500 paradigm carry, to your knowledge, carry across the other languages of Wikipedia?
I personally haven't looked at the other languages of Wikipedia, but other people who have come with basic results that most of the contributions are made by average users and that there's kind of a group of editors. It's usually smaller than 500 for the other languages, but basically a group of editors that keeps the site moving and keeps the site running. Well, I'm being told that our time is up, but thanks very much.